Right, this is going to be another episode of Thorinquiry, and my guest for this one is Robin Black, and he is an MMA analyst, and I'll just say aficionado. Like, I always love that term, it sounds a bit better than just saying fan, right?
Yeah, I love that term too. I try not to sound overly, not to overly exaggerate the idea or to misuse a term, but I like connoisseur too, like connoisseur of martial arts. And MMA is it's a big part of what I analyze, but it's the martial arts in general, combat, fighting. MMA happens to be a really popular one, so I do a lot of my work in there, but I love martial arts and I love what you can learn from it, and I love being inspired by it. It's, the secrets to the universe are in a fight.
Right, one thing that I think is interesting is normally in my interviews, I'm actually quite famous in the other field I work in for, I hate doing like the intro part where it's like, when did you get into it? Like, what were you doing as a kid? Because it's just the most tired, played out question. But in your case, usually you're on the other side of the microphone or you're just presenting whatever topic you like. So I will admit, I've only seen your content. I actually don't know what your background is. Like, do you have a martial arts background? When did you get into M&A roughly?
That's so cool because I'm familiar with, when it was mentioned that you and I were going to chat, a whole bunch of people were like, oh, I can't wait to hear you guys chat. And right away I was like, oh, I think I want to talk to this guy, so I'm vaguely same thing. I'm aware that, esports, you're an expert, you're a connoisseur, you're a historian in that field. So I'm looking forward to hanging and just chat. I love to chat across different paradigms. Like I love that, to look for different similarities between things. But I think I would guess that you have a very non-linear sort of process to where you are today. And I'm very much the same. Like I'm a martial artist. I fought in a cage 9 times. I was trained martial arts as a kid, but I'm an artist. I'm interested in art and music and a little bit of fashion and culture and poetry and these things. And so I came up actually, although I trained martial arts much of my life, I came up as a musician. And I traveled around Canada, Europe a little bit, the UK and Ireland a fair bit, and sung in a glam rock band wearing tight pants and eye makeup.
My goodness.
And doing jumping kicks on stage. Yeah, so I've always martial arts is my sort of root passion, and I see it very much as a fine art. But I was a musician, I was a hairstylist, always as a martial artist. Martial artist is, I don't think of it as a trade, or I don't think of it as a job. I just think of it as my lifestyle, like studying human movement and fighting and how problem solving, the metaphor of solving problems with your body and what you learn from that. And I kind of combine it over to art and music. Being a musician, I learned to edit video and make music videos and write poetry and perform, and all of those things are all little bits and pieces of martial arts too. So it all just sort of was a non-linear path that involved, being a professional, living as a professional athlete and fighting, 9 times as a pro for about 6 or 7 years of that path. But a lot of it has also been being an artist and working in television, and it's kind of all part of the same path to me.
Sure. I mean, I can definitely agree. Like, I think in any kind of like a passion-driven industry, that's really the sign when it's time to leave, is when, it feels like it's a job, or, right, I'm just going to do this because the paycheck's nice or whatever. You don't get into it for that reason. So to me, you should keep going. So here's one where I thought we could, since you referenced, obviously, that I work in the esports side, I'll make an analogy to that. So one of the main areas where you're going to meet hostility, or there's just going to be like almost like a gate keeping people out of my particular field, is at a first glance, it's just people playing video games. So to them, it's like, where's the sport in this? Where's that? Well, MMA has its own equivalent, which is, if you've never watched combat sports, sure, most people have watched some boxing, but even in boxing, with the gloves, with the knockdown rules, you don't tend to get the sort of, let's say, I like the term ultra-violence just from the Kubrick movie, you don't really get that kind of intensity. And so I have to say myself, as someone who's been a long, long time MMA fan, we're talking like the early 2000s, that was the biggest barrier for me, is that people would be recommending it, some of my really nerdy friends. And as someone who had only ever experienced violence in my life, growing up in Northern England, in a very negative manner, it was never something that was fun. I wasn't into martial arts at all. initially, it took me quite a while just to kind of just be able to tolerate, blood, violence, the fact that essentially if I like a guy, I want him to really beat the other guy. But what do you think of getting past this, like the initial barrier?
Yeah. Oh, I love the line that you're thinking along. So the nerd part, first of all, George St-Pierre is, you're a martial arts fan, but he's one of the great fighters ever. And he and I are friends.
Sure.
And when he came to me one day, and we knew each other, but he saw me and John Ramdoon, who I worked with, and we analyzed fighting in a different way. And he's like, you guys, the reason I love what you do is you show that smart people can like the sport. He goes, don't take offense, but you guys are martial arts nerds. And I just took that as such a compliment, because to me, the idea of a nerd is somebody who just looks deeply into something and peels back further layers. And that's kind of what I do. So I know what you're asking. And the answer that I'm trying to find my way to is that the fight itself, like, first of all, I don't like violence. And I know that sounds funny to somebody who lives his entire world in combat sports, but I don't like violence. I like artistry. I like problem solving. And the journey of fighting allowed me to see, and it's something I try to share with the viewer, that the fight itself, if you're going to succeed, you're searching for serenity within the chaos. So there's such a massive, and we hear this all the time with anything. Esports is 90% mental. Football is 90% mental. Sure. Fighting is 90% mental. Everything is 100% mental. Everything. Because if you and I right now are chatting, reach for your coffee cup. Yes, you used your hand, but your brain sent all the messages. Sure. Your brain made that choice. Your brain lit your nervous system to take that action. If you're under duress right now and I'm slapping you or throwing something on you or shaking you, you can't do that. The ability to do that is to find the serenity within that chaos. And that is in and of itself what a fight really, really is. The surface, a guy's punching another guy, somebody's kicking somebody, somebody's trying to choke somebody. But that's just sort of a manifestation of what's happening in the nervous systems of two highly engaged, highly developed brains. And once you peel it back that much, you realize it's not really about the violence. And I also kind of understand, and this is kind of what you're saying too, how you watch fighting now is not how you pictured it before you understood that, right? So a big part of my job and my passion and my mission is to let people see that, is to have people come up to me and it happens a lot, and it moves me every time, and it always will. It's like, you made me see this different. Like I said, I don't see it as a sport. I see it as a fine art. Some people look at painting a certain way, but somebody who loves painting looks at it, understands the history, understands the texture, is curious about the process, understands how their emotion was involved. Once you see that, a painting's totally different. And that's how I see fighting. And that's what my mission is, to help other people see it that way. Be there to let them see that it isn't about the blood. The blood is a consequence of this artistic expression that two individuals get to try to do because they have another person trying their hardest to stop them from doing it. It's all of that.
Let me push you on that a little bit, though, because the thing is, in my own field, again, if people just see the video game, or maybe they've played the video game in question, but they've never seen the sport element of it, they've never seen how deep, you can go, the technique that's involved, as you're saying, like the chess game of the mind and all the rest of it, it's going to take them a while to get into it. And one thing that I would ask is this. In the same sense as if you really nerd out in a particular field, yeah, you can enjoy something that's absurd to the other person. Like, I think, for example, if someone's an American football fan, they don't really want to watch a defensive battle. They want to watch people scoring the ball, scoring touchdowns, highlights. But if you're a real NFL fan, you could really nerd out on that. Like, oh my God, look at the way this defense is shutting them down. And that's supposed to be the best offense in the league or whatever. So in the same way, in an esports game, I can get really into the team that's super tactical and all the rest of it, but I know that some of the fans, there has to be an element of just raw excitement. There needs to be some unpredictability. So even though you say you don't like the violence, how do you separate it out, though? Because, for example, I think of some of the fights where it really was a stalemate. Like, I think the one that comes off the top of my head is when they did, the rematch of, I think it was the Rashad Evans rematch, where they essentially just, touched each other's hand for 3 rounds or something, and then, no one did anything. Whereas the first fight, was that crazy knockout. And so, even though, if you understand the fighting game, like there's a reason Rashad Evans doesn't engage there, because Machida's one of the best counter punchers and Machida's waiting for his opening. And, it's like if you understand all the abstract things that aren't in front of your eyes, it can be beautiful, but it still does need some action to make it kind of vital, right?
Yes. Well, you're having multiple paradigms or multiple sort of different dimensions of what's happening. They're all happening. So you're commentating esports and you're getting into the minutia. That's really there. Somebody interpreting it through their interface of their eyes and ears and brain is saying, I just need screaming and yelling and stuff. That's real too. And then what's happening between Machida and Shogun, or who were we saying? Oh,
Rashad Evans, I think it was.
Yes. So simultaneously, if you have looked at it, if you really understand what's happening, what is going on between the dynamic of these two brains, one has created hesitation in the other. That's real, right? So, but at the same time, you're talking about doing my job. My job is not necessarily to only say what's real, although that's at the root of how I'm driven to do it. And it's really important to me to find out how to do what's real. But I also have a requirement from my employer and from the audience to give them something else. I believe if we can teach them about the idea of what happens when somebody sees a threat, experiences a threat, or let me put this a different way. If I get good at on Monday morning, while somebody says, was that the most boring fight of all time? Because that'll be the conversation that comes up, the narrative that will take shape. And because again, how media, sports media, journalism, et cetera, it's its own sort of has its own narratives. It's a system of formulas for how it works. Something happens Monday morning. People say it's a list. It's a comparison point. What does it mean? What's next? There's only a limited amount of things that are discussed in old school media. So the typical question will be, was that one of the most boring fights you've ever seen? Now, there's a lot of things that have to happen at that point. One being, do we define what boring is? We talk about how and why, what our expectations are when we're watching it. But to me, we go into what's curious about it. It isn't whether or not that was more boring than some other fight. I was going to try to name one, but I don't
like
find
a Brock Lesnar fight or something, some knockout, some famous
or some other parallel one where they're like, this is like Francis Ngannou versus whoever.
Where Francis Ngannou knocks out,
Yes. But is it boring? My answer would be, it's curious. It's fascinating, because if you talked to Rashad Evans, a week before, a day before, an hour before, 10 minutes before, and you said, what would be your biggest fear? What would you do anything to avoid? He'd say, the thing that I would be the most ashamed of or embarrassed of or feel the worst about is if somehow I just couldn't get going. I just couldn't pull the trigger. I hesitated. That's always you ask 100 fighters and 90 of them will tell you that's their biggest fear. They would do anything to not have a fight like that. Then you ask them 15 minutes later, what happened? And they say, I have no idea. I just couldn't pull the trigger. I don't know what happened. Now, suddenly I'm fucking fascinated. Like, you mean to tell me that you can't explain it? And only an hour before you would have done anything to not have this. And then 20 minutes later than that, they'll say, I'm so ashamed. I don't know why I couldn't do it. Well, now I'm curious. Wait a second. The people in there. So instead of us saying, is this or is this not boring? What we're going to do is have a conversation about our enjoyment level of something that we have some limited understanding of or project expectation on. But to me, what's fascinating is those professional athletes who would have done anything to fight different could not fight different. Why? What was happening? Then we start to get into the idea of when a child touches a hot element, they hesitate, they cry, they don't touch it again. That function of training the brain to fear things, the inability to kind of get yourself to go. Now we've got a conversation going. Now we've got the ability to educate somebody that, wait a second, it's more if you choose it to be. Because my belief, again, I think we're kind of talking about my job or the job or our jobs here. Typically, there'll be somebody else sitting right beside me at whatever desk who can say, man, bro, that's boring. These guys have a job to do. They have an expectation. Yeah, this is the entertainment business. That guy can say that. I can then talk about the realities of they would have done anything to fight different, but they couldn't. Why is that? And now we have an interesting conversation. And so that's how I see my job, because I'm so driven by curiosity and the desire for truth. That's at the root of how and why I'm doing what I do now, is I want to know what it actually is happening when somebody says, that guy's got knockout power in both hands. I say, wait a second, nobody has power in a hand. Actually, you don't have power. Power is not something you have. Power is something you create. Wait, how is our language shaping our understanding? Sure. And that to me is interesting too, because that doesn't matter necessarily about esports or fighting, but it does matter about politics or the environment or science or COVID-19 or whatever. Now suddenly we can understand, we can look at, wait, how are we inadvertently lying to the audience and making them sort of see half truths? Oh, wait, we do it in sport. We do it in entertainment. We do it on television. Oh, wait, maybe we can do better. And so little things like that kind of creep their way into my motivation.
I'm definitely with you on that angle, like especially the job element. Like if you know what you're looking for, there's always a narrative that comes out of every match. It doesn't matter. In fact, in this case, if it's a stalemate, actually, and now you really have to go to work. Now you have to put that brain. Anyone can talk about the knockout and you can give all the superlatives, but actually explaining to someone why abstractly this fight was fascinating. Was a chess match? Because, I mean, chess match is a good analogy as well, because most people, as much as they know chess is very intelligent, they wouldn't watch it. They would think it's boring. So here's one thing I want to ask you is, one of the things you've become very famous for is you have a very evocative style in how you describe the fighters, how you model the fighters. You don't just make it technical only. You don't just make it only hyping it up. I've always loved that Chael Sonnen line that like hype is basically bullshit, because like what, you wouldn't need to hype it if it was real. Well, he says he's a truth talker, but you know his angle. He's been a bit silly there. But what I wanted to ask you is, how do you manage to work in that domain without hitting cliches, without feeling like I can't say every knockout's beautiful. I can't, there's only so many superlatives. Yeah. Is there a craft to that as well?
Yeah. And so, man, I knew I would have that I would enjoy this conversation. First of all, the Chael reference. Chael is a genius. He's a brilliant and wonderful person. And even saying that he's a truth teller is a lie. He's a game player. He's a narrative weaver. He takes you on trips, and he takes you on emotional trips. And throwing in the thing about the truth is just Chael's next layer of playing that. And I love it. I love him, and I admire him, and I love him greatly. I'm looking for the opposite. I'm literally going in there and saying, you know what? That guy's got crazy power, and that guy's got a great chin. When this goes down, it's going to be fireworks. I would do anything in my life not to say that. I would do anything in my life not to say, this is a highly anticipated matchup between the best striker in the world and a jiu-jitsu black belt. If this guy can keep it standing, but if this guy can take it to the ground, what we're going to see is a dynamite main event. I would do anything to not say that. To me, I've wasted every second that I had there. I've wasted every moment. I've wasted every breath. I've lied to the audience. I've repeated a narrative that's 35 years old that gets repeated week after week. I would do anything to not say that. The root of, for me, how to do it, I went down a road where I wanted to do it my own way. I wanted to be as authentic as possible. Talk about martial arts the way I see it. Talk about it the way I train it, the way I like. I'm just eternally curious. Like, I will never get bored, because I'll always continually find a new piece of information, which just opens up new questions. So that aspect I wanted to do. I wanted my own language to change constantly. I wanted my own knowledge root to be constantly reminded that I know very little. And the key to that was to basically reject all of the paradigms that are already there. Reject all of the cliches and
question
the formulas.
All the assumptions, right?
Yeah, all of it. If there's a thing that is normally said at the desk at a UFC show or by everybody on Twitter or on anything, that's the one place, that's the thing I won't say. And not because I just won't say it. I just can't. And every now and again you find yourself doing it. But
of course,
if you turn on any UFC, you turn on last night, you'll watch any 3.5 minutes. And this is not to be critical. This is just to sort of point out the formula. Not everybody hates formulas. Not everybody dislikes them. Some people love formulas. But somebody will say, oh, look, they're a great jab. Oh, nice low kick. They'll basically say the thing and then add a superlative or add some type of enthusiasm that some is real, some isn't, some is just a performance. They don't even know whether it's real or not. It's not anybody's fault. It's just a formula that's been created. Then they say, oh my God, big right hand. Any sentence other than big right hand is better than saying big right hand, because that's said 16 times a night. Yes. It actually has no meaning anymore. It has no meaning. So it's extremely difficult we humans exist because somewhere in our ancestry, one looked at it. One guy figured out he could take a stick and put it down an anthill, and when he pulled it back up, there'd be ants, and he'd eat them. And then the rest of us looked and said, hey, look what Steve's doing. And we all imitated it. We have mirror neurons in us, and this is part of what we do. So you must make a concerted effort to not do that. And when you make that effort, a year later, a year and a half later, 2 years later, you still find yourself doing it. And it's shockingly revealing to how we all behave. It's revealing to, wait a second, why do I believe what I believe about the president of the United States if he's good or if he's bad? Why do I believe what I believe about religion or politics or science or any of these things? How much of this is just my mirror neurons repeating what I've heard and believing I know? And suddenly it's very revealing. You look and say, I don't just want to say what sportscasters say. I actually want to explore and really. A television analyst often just says the stuff television analysts say in any sport or art or anything. I actually want to analyze. To do that, I must reject the things they normally say. And so it was actually a very stressful experience. 3-4 years ago, I started finding that, wait a second, almost everything we say in television is fairly limited and or bullshit. It's a plateau that someone in the 80s said a thing. It seemed cool, and we kept saying it. But now it's 2020, and we know a whole lot more. The way to learn more would be to reject that old idea. It's very difficult to do, and you find a lot of internal stress when you do it, and you find a lot of pushback. You start going on YouTube or television or wherever and tell the audience everything you think you know about this. Everything I think I know about this is wrong, which I'll know by rejecting it. But I'm asking you to come along for the ride, and all you wanted to do was watch some guys fight. You get a lot of pushback. It's a lot of tension, but it was worth it because now I'm somewhere on the other side of it, and I see everything in different ways. I see texture and color, and I see physiology and emotion and mentality and metaphor and all these things and all these martial arts moments that I was incapable of seeing because I was limited by the language through which I heard it, which dominated my thinking. And it's doing it to all of us, and we're doing it every day in most things that we consume. And so it's it's a lot of intention to get past that. And it takes a long time, and it's really hard. But then once you do, it's so rewarding and it's so worth it.
I mean, when you're saying that, I immediately think, because I'm also involved with writing in my particular field, and I always remember what the great journalist Christopher Hitchens used to give as a piece of advice, which is he said, anytime you feel yourself about to write a cliche, just stop, think of it in your own words and write it out. Because otherwise, what you find if you go into the cliches, even though, they're so well established, they do fit the moment, calm, cool and collected, like you said, in a certain way, it hits a macro in the human brain, as it were. But the problem is, if you do that, listen, in the short term, someone might enjoy the article because they'll just breeze through it. Their mind will recognize it all. But at the end, it may as well not have been you who wrote it. Like, where was your voice? And I would say you particularly, your entire pop-off, as far as I can tell, is from being this guy who's coming at it from another angle and who's not afraid to almost get poetic in a field where some people are just bleed fans, right?
For sure. And those guys won't necessarily like my stuff. And you have to allow that to be okay. And in fact, it's eventually celebrate it. If you are being tolerated by everybody, you're being you're creating beloved content for nobody. You need to do not need. I say that sometimes, like you must or you need to. That's not true. We live in a free society. You should do whatever makes you happy. But I believe for me, I don't want to I never wanted to fill a role. I think that's what it comes down to. There have been different times at different parts of my job where I can sit in that spot and wear the thing broadcasters wear and say the stuff broadcasters say, knockout power in both heads, striker versus grappler in a stylistic matchup. I can do that. one, it's boring. Two, it's inauthentic. And three, I just don't want to do that. I'm deeply curious. When I see that done, I think, are we lazy or are we formulaic or do we not care? I do care. I do want to know what's going on. But yes, that audience, over time, that audience has seemed to very much lately either tolerate me or find me curious. At one time, there was definitely like sort of more rejection or ridicule or whatever. If you're asking somebody, have you ever seen I'm sure you have because this is related to your world, but sort of the curve of technology adoption life cycle? How
sure.
humans, yeah. Yes. Well, people feel that way about language too, and about ideas and about new things that, people are listening and they look at technology adoption life cycle. At the beginning, there's a very small group of innovators and early adopters. Those people are going to like new language. They're going to like the attempt to find a deeper idea, even though it may fail. The journey of it. They're going to like that. And then the early majority will catch on and go, well, Bink can enjoy the hostilities. Joe Rogan seems to like it, so I guess that's okay. The late adopters, they're only just getting used to the idea of, this guy's whatever the 3 or 4 or 5 years ago language was. They're only used to getting that now. And the laggards are just going to be like, I hate this guy. I hate people who try to change things. I like everything to stay the same. So whatever it is you do, whatever field you work in, that technology adoption life cycle is going to be relevant to technology. It's going to be relevant to language. It's going to be relevant to new ideas, to trial and error. There's going to be some people who love it. But the world we live in now, you get to spend a lot. You end up being consumed and shared by like-minded people who like your stuff. So you and I get to make a pretty good living doing what we like, doing it our way now, because there is a world of people who will appreciate it. But with that comes a world of people who are like, who is this esport historian? Esport's only 5 years old. This guy's full of shit. They don't know, right? And that's okay. It's become a good part of it. I don't think there's a lot of value in attempting to appeal to everyone. I think the real life, happiness, contentment value is in if you're able to do what you want long enough to make it meaningful to some, and those people get to find you, then you are living a good life. You're living your best life.
I've got an angle on this you might like, actually, because the problem is, listen, if I took, listen, I'm a bit more blunt, mate. I'm from Northern England. I'm not a very political guy. I have a hard time with that. So I'll just say it straight up. When I'm talking in my field, I am kind of I was a big fan of Chael Sonnen. So I definitely take some of those elements. I like to kind of be brash. I want to immediately make someone like or hate me. I want I want to kind of really set the tone. But when I do it right, one of the other ways I do it is because I also want the best fighters, the best players and the best match and the most in-depth thing. I don't want, the everyday game that I could see at any time. I will absolutely just outright say I'm an elitist. And essentially, with some of the things you talked about there, if you just take elitist to mean you want to watch the absolute best of everything and you do make a hierarchy of you have metrics by which you determine things, right, that will sound, as you're saying, like you're going to leave some people behind. So I have a line, right, which is to make it not sound like you're just purely arrogant. What I say is this: I'm not condescending to people when I do my style. I'm not saying you aren't smart enough, you can't come along. What I'm saying is it's a lot of fun where we are. Come and join us. Start to get into it.
Yeah. And you certainly don't have to, but if you are hesitant to go, this guy's just over exaggerating a rear naked choke.
Sure.
Well, if you really don't think there's more to it, then why the fuck aren't you a brain surgeon? If you really don't think astronomy, brain surgery, a high-level professional martial arts contest, open heart surgery, fucking engineering is more complex than it appears to you, that's your fucking problem, right? I feel for you. If you really, but often it isn't that. It's people are afraid. They're afraid there's a joy in finding out you know very little. Right.
Absolutely,
and I remind myself every single
day. It's addictive, right?
It's so thrilling. Every way along the path, no matter where it gets to, somebody celebrates your work for a moment, or you make a breakthrough that seems to work, or something good happens. I remind myself to look back 5 years and I'll laugh at what I thought I knew. But at the time, I might have believed it was on the forefront of knowledge within my field or within what I'm looking for or whatever. But it's ridiculous to me now because I believed that was ridiculous long enough to keep learning. That's addictive, like you said. I've never used that word around it, but it's true. It becomes your lifestyle. It becomes your path, your journey, constant upgrading of your knowledge. But if you're scared that the idea that maybe there's more to esports or fighting or planting trees or whatever, writing, whatever, than you think there is, that frightens you, and therefore you'll be like, oh, this guy's an elitist, or these people are exaggerating, or somebody over exaggerates brain surgery. You're limiting yourself. You're limiting your future potential knowledge. But it's your life. People get to do that if they want, but I love your approach. Like, hey, listen, like, you might call me an elitist, but there's a lot going on here. And look, we're having fun, and don't be afraid to come along and check it out. You don't have to. By no means, you don't have to. And you can absolutely ridicule us over here if you like. But you might find it fun. You might. That's a really good approach. I really like it.
Now, one thing in my field, again, another area where it can be similar, is in the same ways it's very easy for people to just see some people punching each other, some violence, a scuffle, even if they don't understand like interactions between fighters. In the same sense, in my field, when they see people just playing a game and they've played a game on, a more limited level, one thing they will actually get quite upset about when you start to throw the superlatives around is they do feel like you're selling them, wolf tickets, to use the old Nick Diaz term. Like, they'll feel like, come on, is this guy really a god? Isn't he just like good at a game? Like, is that really, awe-inspiring the way that he did? But I always tell them, like, yeah, that's the thing, is when you really go deep enough, when you start out, you want to get into it as well. You want it to be something like that. But when you go down that path, it eventually becomes so that it's not even that you're trying to find it. It's, if anything, like we say, you're trying to avoid the cliches. You're trying to come up with a new way to explain how amazing this is. Because in the same way as I could talk to you about some people who are just extremely good at video games, but to me, they're legends of the field and the genius innovators and ahead of the curve, etc. All these classic terms. I think of some of the people in MMA, and if anyone thinks it is just a just bleed sport, I would just tell them, go look up someone like John Danaher, who's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I'd say, genius. Go look up like Rickson Gracie. Find out who these people are, because when you start to know the magnitude of these people, you have to almost reach for like things from like Homeric Odyssey levels of superlative, right?
For sure. And I think sometimes I find that's why I'm always interested in other paradigms, because you see so much similarity in things. It isn't hard to find a 14-year-old in 2020 who can have those conversations about Jay-Z. It isn't hard. But in 2012, it would have been hard. Because the organism that is the knowledge around something is so limited. It's so stunted. Like I said, I mean, if you said Jay-Z is a god of hip hop, Jay-Z is a genius, people will be like, yeah, I thought Jay-Z is a genius. Nobody has a hard time trying. Sure. Prince is a genius musician. Nobody has a hard time understanding that now. But they did once, because these ideas were new. And it goes to the early adopters, the open-minded, which, again, the technology adoption life cycle, how masses of humans connect to things. The early on ones are young, open-minded. They love change. They're curious about the universe around them, et cetera, et cetera. And the later ones are like, they're the wrong kind of skeptic. But if you live in where you and I live, we think that's a limited thing. But they could be very happy too. They could be very happy looking at this conversation you and I are having and going, wow, those guys are weirdos.
Sure.
Right? But the truth is, of course, like, if you understand what's happening, but I think that also really gets to the root of a lot of it too. Everything is curious. Everything is both is simple and complex. Everything is micro and macro. Everything can be learned and studied. Like a grain of sand to certain people is deeply curious. To other people, it's a grain of sand,
Sure.
But it's all the same. It's all always there. So, I definitely understand, even though esports is not my paradigm and not something that I consume greatly, I certainly understand how complex it could be for somebody to develop skills against other highly skilled people within this arena to be capable of doing that, because I study another arena like that. So anybody who's found that in their life, if you were a ballerina as a kid and you mastered it into your teens, if you played an instrument, if you speak multiple languages, if you were really good at flipping BMX bikes, whatever it is, you start to understand it because you have dug deeper into the complexity of a thing. Once you've done that, I think it's easier. But a large group of people didn't have the luxury or the environment or the family or the opportunities or the good fortune or the education to find things to that level. And those ones will have a hard time. They'll be like, bro, it's just a video game, or bro, it's just a punch. Like, stop talking about it that way. It's like, I'm not going to stop talking about it that way. Stop listening to it that way, or stop thinking about it that way. But again, I can't control other people. Neither can you. And we don't control each other. We just sort of do what we do. And if you find beauty in it, and you're lucky enough, like we are, to be able to study something we find incredibly elegant and complicated and curious and beautiful and vulgar and all these things, and get to tell other people about it. I mean, I feel grateful, don't you?
Sure, absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's actually the funniest thing, is that as much as it's easy for someone who's a hater to kind of try and flex on them, like, I'm doing what I love, or, I make money from it, or look at my status. I have to say, the more I do it, even though, listen, I definitely don't think it was pure fluke or anything like that. I know I put in a lot of work and I went through some hard times and stuff, but there is an element of almost grace involved in succeeding. Like, there are certain things where, yes, I had to do a million things to make that opportunity, or a couple of opportunities, or enough opportunities come along that one day I could make the next step. But those didn't have to happen. And no. The fact that you can't control the element, I'm very grateful in that respect, yeah.
There's 27 stops along your path that you can think about that you had golden opportunities to quit. And you did it. Of course,
yeah.
And I mean, 27 would take you 10 minutes to come up with. There's thousands. There's setbacks and there's fears and anxieties. I'm 50 now. I can't believe it, because I still feel like a child, and I'm still, I have a white belt mentality to life and stuff. Okay. But I'm 50. Like, and yes, the now I can pause and go, it's actually working. Like, I have a very stable base of knowledge in something and skills that apply to it, and a world of people that care. And I can take a little exhale and be like, oh, I think I'm somewhere now. But along the way, you face fear and ridicule and pain. And I got kicked in the head. I got knocked out in front of my mother. I got choked out in 45 seconds in a fight, ridiculed because I was the guy who used to play in a band. There's lots of discouragement to not get here. So you're right. Like, you should take some pride in wherever you get, and pat yourself on the back. But we also got all kinds of good luck. Some different choice, and some that weren't ours on the path. And that day we got hit by a car. Like, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, the forks in the road, never mind like failing at something, or some not meeting one person that made a difference or whatever. But there's a lot of those sort of forks in the road that would have led to failure with one wrong choice. So you do, and you're right, you end up, if later in your life you find some amount of success, or enough success that it connects with your happiness in all different ways, you do feel very thankful. And there is grace. That's a very good word. I think one of the biggest, pitfalls, and I've seen it with people, my wife's in musical theater, so I meet all different people who are in different types of entertainment, which is a weird job to begin with. Some people get a moment, or some years, or some big success young, and that's really, really debilitating. Often it's really debilitating for a lot of people, because when it goes away, the path they've never had to walk, the scary, painful, challenging, fear-filled, setback-filled, pratfall-filled path. And so it's hard for them. So, having a more challenging path to get to some location of joy that, I think both of us happen to be fortunate to be in, that the more challenging path, I think, is the better path.
Sure. I mean, I like the analogy there that you've got 27, because obviously you're not meaning literally, you just mean there's loads of them. And that's the one thing I would always say to people that seems so tough to realize from the outside, is they see the finished product, especially once you hit your zenith of popularity, because at that point in time, you've put in so many years and you've made so many mistakes. Yeah, they're encountering you for the first time, and this isn't your first rodeo. So at that point in time, it's easy to think, right, this guy probably just had a connection, or you know what, he's just naturally good at it. I'm not good at it. Well, I can tell you, when I grew up, I'm not saying this for sympathy. In fact, I never mention this in my work, but I'll tell you, 'cause it's a side interview channel. So I'll say this. I grew up as a little autistic boy. So I had no social skills. I didn't even know how, like, I could never interview someone. How would I look at their face and know what they're feeling inside? I'd just have to interpret what they're saying like some sort of robot. So I remember 10 years ago in this industry, mate, there was very prominent people who, when I was just a journalist, and I put just in air quotes there, they would tell me, because I wanted to do commentary, I wanted to be on camera, you know, I thought I could do it. They would tell me, listen, why are you doing this to yourself? You'll never make it in this industry. Look at this guy over here. He's got charisma. Look at this guy here. Like, people like to listen. It's a bit too nerdy for you. Stick to writing or something, you know. Stick to doing the news. Like, you couldn't be part of the scene. And the thing is, I never let that get in my way, though. I never ever thought it was an excuse. That's why I don't bring it up, actually, as a thing. I just thought, right, in the same way as I've learned to know something about the game or something else, I'm going to apply that to learning some social skills. I'm going to try and pick up some little techniques that you can use if you're not a natural at this area. Well, similarly to you, listen, I'll phrase this as lightly as possible. But again, I'm a pretty blunt person, so I don't know how you consider it yourself, but you clearly have, I don't know if it's called a speech impediment, you have a lisp of some type.
Yes.
Now, if you come into a field, right, where your entire job's going to be to talk about fighting, a lot of people would tell you, mate, come on, just forget about it, you know. But I have to say,
100%.
That's literally become, for you, I genuinely think, that's something unique that the others don't have. That's a little something, a tweet, because everyone enjoys the content so much, it's not grating in any way, you know. So what do you think about that?
I 100% agree. And I think, I don't know if you were aware, at what point you might have become aware of this. This is, maybe I'm into sort of understanding this for 5 years or a little more now, or maybe I understood it in a less concrete way. But the things, if 5 and 10 years ago, people would say, and this happened to me a ton. I had somebody say, you know, have you thought about taking voice training, and you know, if we could make you a little more. Maybe we'll color your hair a different color. It's a little bit bold and weird. People find it weird. Do you have to dress so flashy? And why do you use such flowery language? Somewhere in the 5-7 years ago range, I understood that these were superpowers. These were features, not bugs, right? You've
got to make them into strengths, though, right?
Yes, but I understood they were features in the long run. They were features, not bugs. But I understood this because one thing I've been fairly good at from my teens on is somehow sort of seeing how things unfold and having a gentle projection of how the world works based on human behavior. I don't know where that came from or why. I know it's a skill. I know to some degree it's nurtured and stuff, but I could look and literally sit there and think to myself, wait a second. If we're living in a world where everyone in my position right now is being told to speak in a very similar way, 7, 8, 9, 10 years from now, that will be considered very boring, very repetitive. Sure. And it will, what's the word I'm looking for? It will commodify this behavior.
Yes. And washes over you.
And which is exactly what I'm saying about, you know, it's a big right hand. That is a commodified or a term. It doesn't have meaning. It's lost all its value. You know, saying something is a highly anticipated matchup between two people is actually probably giving you the opposite result. It's become commodified. We've said it so much, it becomes meaningless or maybe less than meaningless. Everybody's speaking the same. 5 years if they're all being trained to speak, if every producer thinks this is the TV language, the pendulum will have to swing the other way. If everybody's becoming, they'll use the term, and I don't know if you hear this or if it's around your world, people will say, use the term professionalism. This broadcast is very professional. Well, I think that term is wrong, because what they are is saying that broadcast or that person or that whatever is very formal. Right? They associated formality with professionalism. So in a world where everyone's formal, informal will suddenly become valuable. And of course, Joe Rogan and many others prove this as they smoke pot and swear on their podcast, which is consumed by so many more people than the Tonight Show.
It's crazy,
but yet the Tonight Show just keeps trucking along in exactly the same formula way, making slight changes within the formula, even though we live in a world where their formula is old and weird, right? And it was the same thing. If somebody is like, we'll have to teach you not to speak weird. It's like, actually, weird is going to be good. in 5 or 7 years. And besides, by being myself and not being shaped into some type of, of broadcaster the way my dad or my grandfather, if they, or basically an old white guy in a suit in a television place says it should be, it's going to become commodified. And so I believed in that, and I still do. And you're right. Like, it's weird to be the guy that slightly has a lisp, but now it's part of it. Like you said, 500 million people have watched my 1 minute breakdowns. 500 million. So clearly this wasn't, would it be 2 billion if I'd have taken voice training, or would it be less? My guess is it would be less. I'd be less me. I'd be less comfortable in doing it my way. I'd be less, fearless about saying something.
You wouldn't be as recognizable, mate.
Yeah. And by making small changes in who you are for some other person, I think you lose a little bit of the confidence to say and do things your own way. I don't think it's just about the voice, or I don't think it's just about the outfit, or I don't think it's just about being told to hold your hands a certain way or stand a certain way. I think each of those things, being sort of directed to become someone other than you are, in a world where everybody's being told the same thing, you are now being commodified into the old and boring. And then the world comes along and people are like, I don't want, another Dan Rather imitation reading the news. So now news on the internet will be bigger. I don't want the typical sports guy giving me my sports. I want a regular person who loves this shit, who's telling the truth, who's speaking in real language. That's the other part. Language ends up, those cliches you mentioned, those are just old sayings. That's all they really are. In fighting, they use the term tail of the tape. Somebody invented that term. Let's say it was in the 50s. If you told that guy, in 2020, every single broadcast on planet Earth is going to use your phrase, that guy would have shit his pants. He would have never believed that. Wait a second, I just came up with that on Wednesday. I thought it sounded cool. And we'd be like, no, seriously, the whole world decided ever since then that never could a better concept come up than your concept. That's it. We stopped trying. We just said, somebody came up with a good thing here. We're done. And yes, I get that tradition is, there's some beauty in tradition. Of course there is, right? But when everything is just tradition, it's no longer like a bit of tradition. It's ritualistic. A boxing broadcast is ritualistically just very similar to the 50s. And in the 50s, they didn't come up with the best ideas. They just came up with ideas, and we stopped coming up with them. And so those are the things I fight against purposefully and passionately, and out of joy, and out of curiosity, and out of weird. Like, I look and sometimes go, wait a second, why are we doing this exactly the same way as we've been doing it since the 60s? Which is, and also I might add, bits and pieces I see of esports, I think, why does this kind of look like a video game version of an NFL broadcast? It should look, you should have been able to invent this thing from the ground up without having to model it after an old paradigm. Right?
Yeah.
Don't you? Yeah.
That's actually what I'm doing in my field now. Like, this year, I actually got a side job where basically I'm in charge. I'm the creative director of a broadcast. And so that's what we're talking about now is exactly what I did. I literally went away. I looked at all the unchecked assumptions. I looked at all the things that people just took because, like, almost like a cargo cult. They just saw, well, on sports, on television, it does this. And it's like, well, I'm not on television. This isn't sports, and I'm doing something different. And if anyone wanted to watch sports, it's right there. So yeah, I did a lot of that stuff. So one thing I want to jump into with you is, right, in my field, listen, there can definitely be matches where I think the other person, the one who lost, or the team who lost, I think they should have won. I think they were better. But that's usually just down to things like just basic luck, variance within the match. Your field has, I would say, it's always going to be a very problematic concept, which is that it's judged. And so as a result, there are fights, some of them very egregious, but some of them minorly, where you just, as a person, as someone who's an aficionado, you just disagree with the result. Now, the problem I have with that is, as a fan, I mean, I don't have to work in MMA, mate, so I can be almost a semi-hater. Like as much as I actually do think GSP is the GOAT, I personally think that Johnny Hendricks, by the rules of modern MMA, won that fight. Like, they count takedowns in that way. I actually think he won the fight. I just think that for whatever reason, the judges went the other way on that. We all know that some of the judges they have their own ideas. So the problem I ask for you is this. In your heart, do you ever still think just qualitatively, I take that guy as winning the fight? Is there a moral victory? Because on the other hand, when you then talk about a title fight, I mean, it does ruin the excitement if you think, well, this guy shouldn't have been here. Or, for example, as people will see, if Conor McGregor just gets boosted into a title fight, listen, it's going to be really exciting. But part of us deep down is going to go, has he won enough fights to do that though? Should he, so your field has such a vagary around it. So how do you rationalize that? How do you get past that?
Yeah, that's interesting. For me, the study of anything deeply, you end up studying philosophy. You study esports or knitting deep enough, and you start to look at the big pictures of life and thinking. And I personally, my personal philosophy is one of acceptance. So if I lost a fight and I was George or Hendricks or anyone, I lost it. I think there are two things I can do. One is accept it. Okay. The job was to make two of those three human beings see it for me. Okay. And that didn't work tonight. So therefore I lost. I'm mad about it. I'm emotional. I'm not happy about it because I'm a human, but this is the truth. I must accept it. It's one of those forks in the road along the path. This is the fork I've been given. Now, I don't have to like it, but if I accept it and begin to train, to change something, to learn something, it motivates me in different ways. I don't, I let it go instead of being emotional about it. It can take me on a path where I could end up looking one day at those two people making what I believed was the wrong call as being a key moment to a future that involves me being the best I could have been. Or because I lost, I ended up going somewhere different on a vacation and I met my wife and the whole, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
That
everything has to happen, right?
Yeah, I think you have to. The other way you go is you don't accept it. You're angry, you're bitter, you're upset about it. That eats away at you. Acceptance is a tricky one, in life, because if I decide to be angry or upset or freaked out about the fact that I got robbed by a ref, I've not hurt the ref. I've not hurt the truth. I've not affected the path. I've just hurt myself. Sure. The only recipient of negativity to me not accepting this happened and there it is and it sucks, but let's soldier on, is me. So I feel like that the fighter has to do that. I feel like the audience, what choice do we have? And our choices are, well, it sucks. Judging is still pretty bad. Hopefully something changes, or maybe if we have some influence, we can see if we can change it, or we can go on Twitter and freak out. Now, sometimes that's fun. Some people find joy in it, but for the most part, that kind of controversy and conflict and outrage and all of that stuff doesn't lead anywhere. I often say that complaining is inaction disguised as action. When you go to Twitter and you complain about something, you're actually not taking any kind of action, but you trick yourself into thinking you do.
Yeah, you get the little reward, right?
Yeah, you get a little endorphin reward or attention reward or something, but you're actually not doing anything. To do something would be to say, that's it. I'm going to start some company that has some influence on how judging takes place.
There we go.
Or I'm going to go and become a judge. I'm going to go study and become a judge. Or I'm going to write articles about it from a standpoint of looking at the process and how and why it is and studying what could change. Those are actions. Going and complaining, and people will say, yeah, but you need to, when something's wrong, it has to be pointed out. It's like everything is pointed out every day and very little is done because we trick ourselves. We believe we're doing something when we type about it or when we talk about it, but we're not. So I look at that as kind of a learning thing for life. Like there's going to be a lot of weird shit goes down and it won't always be in my favor, even though I'm pretty sure it should be. I got to just accept it and see where it goes. Or if I actually have the ability to influence it or to create some change, I can consider whether that's a better place to spend my time than wherever I'm currently spending it. But so I look at it very, and again, I think this philosophy, not for everybody. Some people will be like, oh, you just ignore outrage, things that are unfair that ruin a fighter's career. It's like, I don't ignore it, but I don't let it distract me from whatever my actual use of my attention is. But it's a tricky one. I think that kind of acceptance is accepting that you can't control everything, but you can control how you react to everything. And when assessing it, reacting to it by being upset about it would be a waste of time and could affect me and others negatively. Sure. So, but judging's, that's my personal philosophy. But then my professional observation is they're not all that good. we're 20 plus years into it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons they're not that good. They're not paid very well. So there's not a lot of competition.
Yes.
Reason doctors and lawyers and hip rap stars and stuff get paid well, it makes competition and it raises the level of quality. With low pay, that doesn't happen. People aren't clamoring to get in there. It isn't people competing to improve. So, we've got a hard starting point. And then for the most part, there's only 1,000 people, maybe 3,000 people on planet Earth that actually really understand fighting. Really understand it, not understand how to watch it from a sporting event. Like, my wife really liked Grey's Anatomy. It's a show she was watching when she was younger. So we still watch it because it's one of those weird, goofy pleasures. I don't think I know anything about surgery, but I watch that show. People think they do know, they watch fighting and they hear, yes. And they think they actually know about it. And then the complaint from the viewer who is uneducated about the judge who is fairly uneducated in the grand scheme of things, all of a sudden we're all just talking nonsense. Most people actually don't know anything about football or hip hop or esports or fighting. Or politics or science. Like we don't know a lot about things. We live in a society where we're tricked into thinking we know something because we watch television and somebody tells us this is what it is, but we actually don't. We don't spend a great deal of time on it. So, and the judges are the same. You mentioned John Danaher, you mentioned these geniuses. If these guys could judge, now we're onto something. But there's only 1,000 of them on planet Earth. So we need them to teach or to educate in some other way or to fight or to, we need them to do the high priority things. That's why I brought up money. If you said judging a world title fight pays, $250,000, the best would compete to get that role, right? The very smartest and best and most neutral.
Dude, I think that even betrays the difference in mentality, which is, as you're saying, if you really care about it that much, be part of the solution then. It's obviously something that really matters to you. But the problem is most people would go the other way, which goes like this. Well, since coaching does suck, don't pay those guys anything. Like, fuck those guys. But actually, you're right. You will never engender the future you want where we have, like, that's the dream, right? That a guy who could be John Danaher, he gets into the concept of judging and he ends up making his millions doing that. Like, who wouldn't want that?
Exactly. So there's a few of them. Frank Trigg was either a UFC champion or he lost. I know he lost to Matt Hughes. I can't remember if he was a champion or if that was his one title fight. I forget. But Frank Trigg,
I think he was. I think he had I think he won in an upset or something.
Yeah, I think so. It's history is a tricky one when you look at 27 different martial arts and 15 weight classes of each, and 100 years in some and 20 in another.
Where are you going with that one?
Yeah, but Frank Trigg is a judge and a ref now, right? And
that's great.
Of course, he's a good one. Ricardo Almeida he beat Matt Hughes. He's a wonderful martial artist. He's a judge and a ref now, or at least the judge. Big John McCarthy, who and there's a number of other good ones, but Herb Dean, these guys are really into it. Like they're passionate about. There's a certain type of person who's passionate about rules and structures and legislation and organization and these things. And if you happen to love fighting and you have that side of you, you'd be attracted to it. And so that we just over time, the right guys got to go in there. But it happens in figure skate, and then there's worse. Figure skating, in boxing, in Olympic boxing in 2016, they had to change everything because none of them could be trusted. It was considered so dirty that they changed everything, and nobody who was a judge in 2016 in Olympic boxing was allowed to judge in 2020 when it was on. So there's worse than this. This is not the worst in human judged events, but it's bad, and it always will be bad. The human element requires humans, there's flaws in the human element, starting with education, which we don't know much about fighting, most of us, then going to focus, attention, bias, natural human bias. Like there's so many flaws to a human judge system, and many of them will never get cured, which goes back again to acceptance.
Yeah. Right. I thought what we could do is, in the last segment of the show, let's just nerd out about some cool fighters and basically do what you do. So the rest, a lot of that was meta talk, and we were kind of related. So I wanted to pick like a few big classic names, and then we'll also talk about some of the more modern day fighters. So I referenced them already. George St-Pierre, like as you said, I mean, apparently you got the privilege of meeting this guy. Anyone who's seen him on interviews, podcasts, the cool thing about him is, as much as it might be sometimes invisible in the fight to the untrained eye, what he's doing, just listen to him in interviews. He'll tell you his game plan and how he's breaking it down and how he's seen it and who he learned this from and some little detail he picked up. So I always thought the coolest thing about GSP is, in my particular field, the best team to ever play Counter-Strike's one of the main games I do, an FPS game.
Yeah.
They actually currently still play. It's a Danish team, and they're called Astralis. And basically, the way that they became the best ever is they were the most consistent team ever because they could just punish anything that you do. That's their style, basically. They basically are almost like the best counterpuncher. They wait for you to do something. They correctly every time analyze what to do, shut it down. And so the problem with them being the best was, it wasn't until they literally just broke every record, stacked every amount of championships, that actually a lot of the casual fans would give them their due. Otherwise, you just heard, this is boring. Like, I thought this was going to be a great final. They won too easily because, they would want the guy who's the equivalent of the knockout artist. They want the guy who's coming in. He's going to play crazy and wild and from his skill. And what you had to explain to these people is why I do the GSP analogy is, the fact that those guys are so insane like that, like you referenced before the classic cliches, Joe Rogan's most famous one is whenever they do the pre-show for those, the countdowns, he always says every challenger to an established champion is their most dangerous opponent yet. Because obviously they're the one that's now not fighting them yet, and maybe they haven't got a chance. But if you've ever seen GSP fight, they were all coming in with, this guy could have really knockout power, like GSP's going to have to be careful. Then if anyone knows, GSP did just shut every single one of his guys down pretty much. And it made the fight almost look rubbish. But the fact that you could do that to that fighter is like, that alone is mind-blowing. So where do you see GSP in the pantheon?
So George, we're not only friends, but I got to do a documentary on him. So I traveled with him. I trained with him. We traveled to New York and LA and Montreal, and I trained with him in his private gym, and I ate dinner with him and lunch with him every day. And we've been friends for a long time. But this was another level and another layer. And I was in strength and conditioning training with him, reflex training, all of this stuff. And over time, what you see is what I find to be the most fascinating part is he was terrified of fighting.
Sure.
What made him so good, I think, was just two root things about him. He was scared of fighting. He wanted to fight because it was worth a lot to him. It was intrinsically rewarding to win. It was intrinsically rewarding to train. He wanted to do this. He liked the lifestyle of being a fighter. There was a lot of things about it he liked, but he hated and feared fighting right down to the end, every fight. Also, he's an obsessive worker, and an obsessive sort of structured thinker, and he's kind of a boring guy. And I mean that in admiration. Sure. So he would basically be like, I'm afraid that somebody could beat me here, and then obsessively train until he could defeat it. Or he also, this is another real true trait of George that makes him special, and we can all learn from it. When he found something that he would take so much, he would rejoice when he found an area of weakness because he had found something he could work on. When he would meet somebody who was just a tiny bit better at anything, he would obsess over fixing that thing, partly driven by that fear of loss or failure, or just the fear of the fight itself. He just obsessively armored up his body and his mind and his skills, and just built it all up to the point where it just, he had to have every advantage. And if he had every advantage, he could walk towards that scary thing, at least knowing he had the capacity to win it. He's just, when you see somebody like that, how nuanced and layered their thinking and their process is, it's just so fascinating, and you're right. Somebody at certain times he would beat guys at their own game. Then other times he would just be like, I have no weaknesses. They have one. Let's figure out what it is and do that to them. Right. So John Fitch was a brilliant wrestler and a really dangerous on top and grappler. But if you could just use enough jabs to discourage him and keep him away from you, he literally beat Josh Koscheck, a wrestler, and John Fitch, a wrestler. I think Koscheck twice, almost exclusively with one or two weapons. just moving his feet and using a jab. To be so good at one thing that somebody else could not be able to stop it, that's the mark of true genius. And I'm sure that team you were talking about, there are times where they pull it. Wayne Gretzky had a couple of key plays and everyone knew it and they couldn't stop it. Michael Jordan had a couple of key plays.
Yes.
George St-Pierre would just create key plays for the fighter that he was facing because he had all of them. And yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible to see. And weirdly, it was a time, I think because of George's personality, everybody else was big and tough. And I mean, George was big, but tough and angry and gritty. And George was kind of nice and Canadian and soft-spoken and humble. I think that offset the fact that some people thought it was boring or repetitive as he just, systematically disassembled people. But there's a beauty in that. I mean, we're at the root of fighting, it starts with self-defense. Protecting my nervous system, my brain, my bones, my organs, my eyes, like protecting myself from danger. And the best way to do that is to put offense on you or control you in such a way that you can't do stuff to me. And that's what George did at the root of. And Johnny Hendricks, you mentioned, that was one of the toughest ones that he faced. And and Big John thought he lost that fight. I'm close with him and close with Faraz, his coach, so I don't know how much the bias affects me, but I sat down with them and they explained with absolute certainty in their mind why they thought they won 3 rounds. And that the way they approached fighting through that stage of his career was there are 5 fights and you must win 3 of them. They are separated by 1 minute. And that is how the scoring works. And so by that point, you start figuring out how to win the contest. If you're winning a fight, it's different than winning a contest.
Yes.
And there's pluses and minuses to both. There's admiration and we have thoughts about both of those things. And I don't know who won that one because of my bias. It's hard. I recognize bias is real, and I don't know. But I've heard their reason why they thought they won 3, and then I've heard Big John's reason about why he thought. And Big John is wrote the book literally that's used now on judging on why he thought Hendricks won 3. So, but yeah, George is a genius and a wonderful guy, like just an absolutely wonderful, wonderful human being.
I mean, I think you touched on something there that is actually essential, but will be lost to so many people that have never done something at a high level, which is whenever you talk about these people who are the unbeatable champions, I don't mean literally, because obviously in MMA, eventually in theory, everyone will lose. But the idea of like you're saying, like George St-Pierre had everything. Like, I don't know where the weakness is supposed to be. I mean, the weakness in theory is he wasn't a wrestler when he grew up. I mean, good luck with that in the cage because he was the best MMA wrestler. So what I would say is this is the counterintuitive part. Because we all love the highlight, because we love the thing that's incredibly hard to do, we all obsess over that when we're a casual fan and we think that that's the goal. So the dream is the best knockout ever. But I can actually tell you, I think you're going to love this because I can see you're already vibing with the kind of the Miyamoto Musashi angle that, there's things that go across all these disciplines. Now, the team that I was talking about, the Astralis team, was the most tactical team, but on the most fundamental level. Like, they would just beat you with essentially the things that are the most consistent and effective in Counter-Strike, which are not going to be, by the way, one player going crazy and killing everyone or one person doing the hardest shot ever. In fact, if you can set your shots up to be the easiest shots in the game, if you can use a teammate to make it so that we just he's looking at you and I shoot him in the back, that's not sexy at all if you're a fan, but it's the best way to win the game. So in the same sense, all the sports people we're talking about, GSP had probably the best jab in his division. He had the best fundamental wrestling. You look at Michael Jordan. He had the best footwork in the sport. He used to practice the most. Even a modern day person, Steph Curry, who's famous for these 3-pointers, right? As someone who's untrained would think, right, well, he's got the 3-point shot down. No, he shoots more 3-pointers today in practice than anyone else. It's actually circular. That's why he is so great, because he has mastered the fundamentals. And so as much as we all do get caught up in the highlights, really, if you can break things down to their constituent parts, that's the game, right?
Yeah. And it's never about the card that you play. It's not about the card. It's about playing the right card at the right time. In any card game, in any art, in any combat, in any conflict, anything. I get to commentate so many different martial arts, like sumo and sambo and wrestling and boxing and Muay Thai and there's belt wrestling. Like there's very few things I haven't commentated. But one of the most incredible things I saw was the Pan Am Games, and it was Taekwondo. And the Mexican Taekwondo team was not thought of to be one of the biggest that was going to run everything.
Understandably so.
Yeah, and they just came up but they won. They medaled everywhere, and everybody was thinking. And Taekwondo rewards you for flashy kicks. It's in the nature of the structure. You get 4 points for a spinning kick to the head, for example, 3 to the head, 2 points for a kick to the body. Like you get progressively rewarded for the more difficult, and over time people did more difficult. And to throw those kicks have to happen at a certain distance between you and I, the distance between my weapons and your targets, and vice versa. The Mexican team literally moved closer to that distance and threw a punch to the stomach. And they did it over and over and over again. And nobody had been, it was out of fashion. So why could I land a punch to the stomach on you repeatedly? Because it was outside of the realm of what you were considering. It was, and more importantly, it was outside of the realm of what your training partners considered for the last 18 months. So you just never saw it. The simplest root thing just stopped existing in your mind, in your catalog of your inventory of threats that you would face from me. And so over time, these guys they stepped in and they threw punches because it was there. It just became there. The more we thought about all of these other things, the more that the simplest thing was there. And again, like if you can't see a metaphor for all things in that, for an applicable use for that in gardening or cooking or being a good dad or whatever you're doing, then you're just not looking, or you're just not seeing, because it's there, right? Sometimes that simple thing is just there. But you mentioned The Art of War or Book of Five Rings, both of which I read. I'm reading one at all times.
You can never get everything out of it the first time, can you?
No. And I might not. I have them on audiobooks, and 10 weeks might go by where I don't listen to either. But for the most part, one is going at all times, because over those years, the new information you get allow you to see these things in incredibly new ways. These very simple concepts, sometimes complicated things, become so much more simple over years and years of studying whatever you study. And you go back to some root concept from Musashi, and it makes total sense now. Or it made sense before, but now it's much more complicated because you know more. So what you thought it meant, it actually doesn't mean only that, and it's now more nebulous and less crystallized than it was. But I think that's all part of the journey. I think it's all part of the trip.
Right. This might sound like an off tangent kind of way to ask this question, but I wanted to ask you about St-Pierre Miocic, right? And the angle I had for it is one that I haven't really heard people really go with, which is this. Whenever you think of heavyweight fighting, now obviously that is literally the most popular type of boxing in all of history. Yes, in the modern day, Floyd Mayweather, all this, that was marketing, etc. But classically, the most base level fan wants to see people who can punch really hard, ideally aren't the most fast to get out the way, punch each other a bunch, someone gets knocked out. That's pretty much everyone's dream fight in terms of, average across the board, what would get the 10 out of 10s, what's going to hit them check mark, right? So I notice whenever people even talk, again, maybe these are unchecked assumptions about the heavyweight division. Like I remember when Brock Lesnar won that fight over Frank Mir, the second one, and people really, no joke, including Frank Mir, thought, right, holy shit, turns out heavyweight's just about how big you can get, how big your muscles are. So it's, I've got to get as big as Brock Lesnar and shit and Carwin. And what we quickly found out was, literally only took a couple of years. Not necessarily, in some fights it will, and some fights it isn't. And so the thing I've noticed, that's why I thought it applied to Stipe, is, right, you look at Stipe Miocic, you look at Daniel Cormier, you look at Fedor. These guys who, by the way, I would consider the best to have ever fought in the heavyweight division in MMA, they're the undersized heavyweights. If anything, there's something really telling there that people aren't seeing. Because listen, we all love to watch an Overeem, Francis Ngannou. It's so easy to get into that. But there's something there that's very unusual. Because remember, every other weight class, like you referenced GSP, the edge is if you can cut a lot and you can be slightly heavier and you have the weight. That's what everyone thinks of the other weight class. So is heavyweight unique in this regard?
Well, that's an interesting point. I think it is unique at this point, at this moment. But I think if you look at it in a 20-year span, this will come and go. It'll be the big guys will win. Because some of the tactics that will be on the forefront that are working a little bit more will favor them. being on top, big, strong, heavy against the fence. When the game, it's like an organism, and it starts and it flows into that, they'll have those moments. But then a moment like here comes where it's about footwork and speed and ability to move and not getting hit. As a heavyweight, not getting hit is a new thing. So the smaller guys, the smaller guys are better at it. So I think it ebbs and flows. I even ebbs and flows maybe isn't right. I think it's a pendulum. Like it goes one way, the athlete, it goes the other way, the artist. It goes one way, people are bigger, stronger, faster. It goes the other way. They spend, because it's really about where you can allot time.
Yeah.
So let's say that we can spend 20 hours a week training an athlete. That's their physical maximum. Over time, we can figure out how to make that 23. Therefore changing them. But if we make that 20 and we make 9 of that to make you bigger, stronger, faster, and 11 on skill development, but we take a different athlete and we make 20 of it on skill development and we don't make them bigger, stronger, faster, at what point do those 20 hours become 2,000 hours of skill development against the other guy's 1,100? Is that enough that the skill development made them better so that they're bigger, stronger, they can beat the bigger, stronger, faster guy? Or is it 20,000? But at some point, if we allot more time to skill development than we do size, strength and speed and athleticism, at some point the advantage of the skill will make it so that the strength and the size is less important. Because I'm so much better than you, even though you're bigger and stronger, you don't get to use it. And right now, that's so much better is easier to achieve for a 230-pound athlete. We can have him learn quicker. We can have him develop skills quicker. Some of the guys specifically end up being able to learn faster. Maybe their nervous system reacts to training better. Maybe they're just smarter and it's a coincidence. But right now, by making you more about skill and less about, but then with heavyweight, size is natural. And Francis Ngannou, the flaw of the comparison with him is he's only really been training for like 5 years. If he'd been training since he was 10 or 15 years old, like Cormier, he would have all of Cormier's skills and be bigger, stronger, faster. So I think he would be better, right? So there's so many moving parts to it, and it will continually change. Stipe, literally, years ago, I was curious about how he was becoming what he was becoming. And I asked him, do you look at Dominic Cruz or Demetrius Johnson? He's like, I'm studying those guys all the time. And his coaches were trying to figure out how to take these ideas that small fighters did and that people said, a heavyweight can't do that, and just reject that notion and say, well, actually a heavyweight can do that and we will train that way. And so he did a lot of that. So he was looking at that specifically. So it's neat. These are very interesting concepts. I'm taking my wife to the store. We should do this again, man.
Yeah,
and we still have a few minutes, but we should definitely do this again. I've enjoyed this immensely.
We'll do a part 2. Right. How about this? I'll ask you about one last fighter then. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll pick one from the present day. Because listen, I like the classic elements and all the rest of it, but I wanted to actually ask you, in the modern day, right, I'm going to pick one that's probably going to be a surprise to people. I'm not going to pick, Khabib or Conor McGregor or any of these people. The person I find really fascinating, and listen, before people go overboard, it's not for any political reasons or any bullshit like that. Yeah. It's just because I can look past the persona. I understand the marketing. As I say, I do it in my own field. So believe it or not, one of the fighters I'm fascinated by is Colby Covington. Mm-hmm. Because one of the whole reasons why people don't give him his due is they cannot help but be insanely triggered by the persona that he's projecting. He's figured out sort of the chill thing of people, if they don't want you to win, you want them to want you to lose. But then the problem with him is, I've seen him on some podcasts. I can relate to him in the sense that he's clearly actually not that person at all, or he wasn't when he began, and he's still figuring it out, and he's trying to figure out, what route am I going to go in? So his problem is, he hasn't quite paired, the chill charisma with being the villain. He's just straight up making people think he's an asshole. But the problem is, as a result, they're going to think that he isn't that good a fighter, and that is where I am just going to have to depart completely, because even in this fight he just lost, I still think the sky is the limit for this guy. I'm so interested in him. He seems like he has so many skills. He's got a crazy heart as well. What do you think of this guy? Is he going to be a champion one day?
Yeah, he is. So skill, although these distractions and the extra pressures that come with these things have derailed guys before.
That could weird you out. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but he is brilliant. He's a brilliant, and people, Mike Brown and the coaches at ATT were talking about him when he was 3 fights into the UFC. Him and Jorge and I are friends. We've hung out, and I've sat down and had brunch with him.
Very different guy to GSP.
Very different guy. Yes, very different guy. I took him out for brunch after one of his fights. It's on my YouTube channel. We sat down for like an hour. We ate brunch and we talked about life. But he would tell me how good Colby Covington was. These guys would. Now, of course, I don't know how real the fact that they don't like each other. I think it's real. But so when I see this a lot.
If he says that, then that's respect.
Yeah, he talked about all those guys talked about how good Colby was even back then, and people do know it now. People in the know it. They all do. Yes. But you're right. So he plays a game, and it's an interesting one because you're looking at it. The idea of just being skilled, not being good enough to make your money, fight for titles, get the chance to do the things you want to accomplish in your field. First of all, that sucks. But second of all, I don't believe that's necessarily true. But at the time that Colby also is a fan of pro wrestling, and they started working on, what's it called? TNA, whatever, Impact Wrestling. They started doing hits on Impact, him and the coaching staff and different people from ATT. So he started to love it, I think. He started to love that game and started to love the game of provocation. But the nuanced element to it, Jake Hager is one of the main guys at AEW, and he's a very good fighter. He fights in Bellator. And I've chatted with him a lot about fighting. In fact, I reached out to him to ask him if he wanted to talk to Colby to give him kind of some advice, because Jake was talking about it, and he's like, really to do that shtick is much more nuanced than how Colby's doing it. Colby's doing it. The reason, connecting with Donald Trump is smart because there is that, do it to 11 nature of both of those guys and their audience, But yeah, I don't know how good he is at it. If I pull up right now really quickly on Instagram, to get that much attention and do all that much stuff and still only have, and I'm going to pull him up, Colby Covington, to still only have 388,000 followers when you're actively using a shtick to try to create engagement with an audience for the purpose of becoming popular or hated to be able to get these chances. I don't know how well that's actually working out outside the bubble, if at all. But it's interesting because his answer to it is do it more, go even further, be even harsher, be even ruder. And that's actually not the high level pro wrestling answer. The pro wrestling answer is swing a little bit, be hated for a moment, have them question whether it's real, bring it down,
have the one guy where that's the guy you do respect, this
exactly.
Some weird, that would create controversy, right? That's crazy.
Exactly.
Wow, he's not dissing this guy.
And instead of yelling all the time, whisper occasionally, metaphorically speaking.
Sure.
So the question is whether or not he's actually developed that skill, and not that part of that skill is the willingness to be disliked. And that's not easy. It's not easy. Saying that the ends justify the means, that although he's a good human being, and he really, really is by all accounts, that playing this game will result in the ends that he thinks are important, which is getting to fight for a title in a world that doesn't let a regular guy, get there no matter how good he is. But so it's hard to do that. It's hard. Even when I played in a rock band, I did that to some degree. It's hard. It's somewhat lonely. You feel bad. Sometimes people think you're serious. So he's doing a hard job in search of something he thinks is important. The question is whether or not he's nailing it. And I don't know the answer to that. Just getting a headline, but having people think, you're overdoing it or you're trying too hard. I don't know if that works. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to watch him. I'd love to see him. And I did try to hook him up with Jake Hager, who is very, very good at the storytelling aspects of it, to help give him a little insight. Also, Colby does want to be a pro wrestler within a few years. Oh, okay. So he believes that this character, holding on to it and not showing the behind the scenes of it, is important to a career in pro wrestling later. But most pro wrestlers will tell you the opposite. The smart pro wrestling audience understands it is a character and is curious about the process of building that character. Colby hasn't yet shown any of that. Personally, I think the second he goes and says, he admits on one show or with one person and just makes it seem like it's an accident, that he's letting you in on the fact that he's not actually like this and this is a very difficult process, I think that moment he'll suddenly bump up a little bit, because that's what people are actually curious about, is what is this? What's it feel like? How hard is it? How do you do it? Oh, what do you really like? Wait, you're really like that? And you can even add layers, pretend you're like some other thing and then actually be a character too.
Sure.
It's not my specialty. It's not my shtick. But again, I have a tendency to analyze most things and be curious about most things. And so I think that's where he's at right now, but we'll see. It's still early in the book of who he's going to be.
Sure. Well, as you say, you need to go now. So we'll do a part 2. How about this? Just leave us with some final words.
Well, I mean, typically, I just got to end it with, I was going to just say my thing that I end everything with. But truthfully, I honestly think that the secrets to the universe lie in those, moments of fighting. And I think fighting is a metaphor for life itself. And I really believe that. I live that every day. And I believe that. And I think those moments are sacred. And I think we're lucky to be able to have them, that people dedicate their life to going in and doing that. And I dedicate my life to trying to make sense of it. But I really enjoyed this. I had a feeling I would, and I really, really did. So let's be in touch, and let's hit up a part 2 in a few weeks.
Yeah, perfect. Right. See you, mate.
Awesome.
You can run.
All right.
Cheers.
All right. Enjoy the hostilities, my friend.
Thank you.